I think about this every year on Thanksgiving. It's the most chilling and sickening thing I've ever seen. I'm an officer of the Inverness Police Department in Florida, so I've seen quite a lot. But this was worse than anything. It was Thanksgiving Day. I was working, and unfortunately not with my family. I was annoyed about it, but I knew it came with the job. The day went by slowly for the first few hours, leaving me even more unprepared for what was about to happen. I was near the station when the call came in.
You've reached 911 Emergency Services. Please describe the nature of your emergency.
Please, you gotta get the cops here now.
Sir, please tell me what's happening.
I think my neighbor killed somebody.
And why do you think that?
Because I saw it. I was on my back porch setting up the deep fryer when I just looked over the fence for a second, and I saw my neighbor dragging something large. It looked like a body or something.
Sir, please calm down and tell me the address so I can send some officers to check on your neighbor.
I was one of about 7 or 8 officers initially dispatched to the scene. We were told to take caution, as a suspected homicide had occurred, so we approached the house carefully. There was a car parked in the driveway, but the garage door was closed. We also saw some tire tracks in the grass, leading from the car to a wide gate in the backyard. Nobody was in the car, but once we got about 6 feet from it, we were absolutely blasted with a putrid odor. It was that unmistakable stench of decay that you never forget. It made me throw up in my mouth. None of us were willing to attempt to open the trunk or search the inside of the car. The smell was enough to call for backup. We didn't know what to expect as we approached the front door, but we knew in our guts that we were dealing with a dangerous person. There was no answer when we banged on the door and announced ourselves. After several attempts to get the person inside to come out, we conducted a search of the exterior of the house. 2 fellow officers and I went around to the right side, following the tire tracks through the gate and into the backyard. As soon as we turned the corner, we were met with a grisly scene. In the center of a concrete slab was a huge pool of blood. A smear ran about 8 to 10 feet from the puddle across the concrete and ended where the grass started, right at the tire tracks. Next to the puddle was a large meat cleaver covered in blood. At this point, all the alarms went off. We called in for even more backup, quickly surrounding the house. I returned to the front of the house with the other officers and began pounding on the door. Police, open up the door, we're gonna break it down. Come out with your hands up. A chill ran down my spine at the sound that came from inside. We knew what we had to do then, so we got the battering ram and broke down the door. We entered the house 8 deep with our weapons drawn, but we didn't get far before another terrible sight put an end to our search. There was an older man on the living room couch, smiling and staring off into space. There was blood soaking into his shirt. Something about that image made me freeze. I've never seen something so creepy like that in my life. He acted like we weren't even there. One of my fellow officers ended up making the arrest a moment later, throwing him off the couch and onto the ground. The man didn't struggle against the handcuffs at all. He was gaunt and unbothered by the whole ordeal. We called in an ambulance and the paramedics took him away under our supervision. He later died at the hospital, taking all his secrets with him. However, at the time, we were still at the house, and there was a body we had to look for. When CSI arrived and asked us where the body was, everyone pointed to the car in unison. When the investigators got near it, they looked in through the windows, but there was nothing. That left the trunk, which they had to pry open. I remember standing behind the investigators at the car, far enough away to keep from gagging. Despite knowing what was going to be in there, I had a morbid and regretful curiosity about what led to that massacre scene I saw in the backyard. I'll never forget the moment that trunk flew open, revealing the worst thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life. There were body parts in the trunk. It had been chopped up into pieces and tossed in without a care. The sheer terror I felt at that moment was something I never felt in all my years on duty. I had to go back to the station after that. I wasn't part of the investigation, but I kept tabs on it. Apparently, the man that was on the couch had taken out and dismembered the victim and stuffed him in his own trunk. The victim was also an older man, but aside from that, there was no connection between them. There was no known motive either. The vehicle belonged to the victim. To have no reason for such a horrific incident is just unbelievable to me, and it leaves a pit in my stomach every time I think about it. I just hope the family of the victim can somehow recover from their loss. This story was inspired by a horrific incident regarding a 75-year-old Florida man named Jonathan Dimmick Sr., who was found dead on Thanksgiving Day after he allegedly dismembered another man. The suspect then placed the remains in the trunk of his car. Deputies raced to a home in the area of Post Street and Eden Drive to perform an urgent welfare check after getting a call about a possible slaying. When police arrived, they knocked on the front door and announced themselves, but received no answer. Deputies then began checking the home's perimeter. That's when they spotted in the backyard a large butcher-style knife, along with blood and drag marks on the ground. The deputies continued trying to contact Jonathan Dimmick Sr., who they identified as a suspect in the crime. Deputies then entered the home and found Dimmick sitting in his living room unresponsive, with an apparent wound to the abdomen. He was treated at the scene by first responders and then airlifted by a helicopter to a hospital, where he later passed away from his injuries. Meanwhile, deputies continued their investigation and eventually made a gruesome discovery of the dismembered remains of a 67-year-old man named James Banks in the trunk of his own car. A Citrus County sheriff made a statement saying the scene was absolutely shocking and that it was unfortunate that the suspect will never be prosecuted for his brutal crime. Police took solace in knowing that the victim's family can now begin their grieving process with the knowledge that no one will ever again suffer by the hands of Mr. Dimmick. The sheriff's office has not said how Banks may have known Dimmick. What makes the case even more unsettling was that there was no motive for the slaying, allegedly. This may be the most horrifying Thanksgiving story ever. What happened still traumatizes me till this day, but I think now is the best time to share it. It all happened a few years ago. I had just recently moved to the US and was working as a model. It wasn't a great gig, but it was the only work I could find. I didn't make much money as a model. It was barely enough to survive. I ended up having to rent the shittiest apartment I could find, and I was still late on my rent half the time. I never seemed to be able to catch a break. It went on like that for years. I got more and more desperate as time went on. By the time I was 24, I was even worse off than I was before, and it was only a matter of time before I was out on the streets. Then one night, I met this older guy at a bar. We had a few drinks together, and he ended up offering to let me stay at his place in exchange for being intimate. I knew it was probably a bad idea, but I was desperate. I agreed to do it. Things escalated quickly after that. We ended up getting married within a month. I was desperate as hell and figured the trade-off of being taken care of financially would be worth it. The guy had a really nice place, and I finally didn't have to worry about where my next meal was coming from. The guy seemed okay too, but all of that quickly changed. It didn't take long for me to realize what an asshole the man was. He treated me horribly. The old piece of shit was just using me, and I had to go through with it every time he wanted to. I hated it, but I didn't have a choice. I had to put up with the rich drunk just to make it through life. It went on like that for a while. I wasn't desperate for money anymore, but I didn't know if I was better off than before or not. Then one night, the two of us were watching TV a few days before Thanksgiving. My husband got drunk as we sat there, which was typical for him. He couldn't go 10 minutes without having a beer. I was pretty used to it at that point. Then, as we sat there, he suddenly turned to me and asked me if he could stuff me like a turkey. I refused, but he kept asking me over and over again. It was obvious that he was completely plastered, so I snapped and blew up at him.
It's not going to happen, so just leave me the hell alone.
My yelling caused him to stop talking for a moment, and I thought that I had finally gotten him to shut up. But then out of nowhere, the guy went apeshit and lunged at me.
I should've got a prenup!
Before I could even react, the psycho grabbed me and tried pinning me down. I kicked and screamed, trying to break out of his grasp. The guy was too drunk to hold me down for long. I then finally managed to break free and run to the washroom. I was able to lock myself in, just as the monster caught up with me. He then started banging on the door and throwing his whole body against it, trying to break it down. He kept banging on the door until he eventually passed out. I waited in the washroom, sobbing. I didn't know what to do. I knew I was safe here and better off waiting for the rest of the night. Eventually, hours went by. I didn't hear him out there again. I didn't know where he had gone, but I knew that I had to take my chance. I slowly opened the door, but there was nothing. He was nowhere around. It was dark everywhere. I paused for a moment, wondering what to do. Then I eventually armed myself with the clothes ironed and scissors from the bedroom, and then walked back out. I then slowly crept down the stairs and walked to the living room. I was shitting bricks. I knew he had to be in there. I tried to be as quiet as I could. The TV was still on when I got there, and my husband was passed out drunk on the couch. From the looks of it, he had been out for a while. I stood there staring at him. At first it was minutes, but then it was a few hours. I didn't move once. I just stood in place, still holding the scissors and the clothes iron. It felt like forever, but he eventually woke up. It didn't take long for him to see me standing there. He blinked a few times, obviously confused.
What are you?
A few days later, it was Thanksgiving. I woke up early to get everything ready. There was a lot to do. I made the stuffing for the turkey first. It took a while, but I knew it was going to be worth it when it was time to eat. It was finally going to be ready. I was hungry as hell. His relatives eventually started calling his phone every single day, but he never seemed to answer though. I didn't bother to answer it either. I didn't want to jeopardize and interfere with any of his calls. The cops eventually showed up, and I was arrested not long after that. It wasn't until they took me away that I fully realized what I had done. I've been traumatized by Thanksgiving ever since, but I don't regret what I did. This story was inspired by a disturbing Thanksgiving story that we did last year, but wanted to revisit it, as it might be the creepiest Thanksgiving case still to this day. The case we are talking about is a 24-year-old woman named Imagary Ari Nelson, who is known as the real-life cannibal, Hannibal Lecter. She was an Egyptian nanny and model. It started out like any other Thanksgiving day in November of 1991, but instead of turkey, Imagry's husband, Mr. Nelson, was on the menu. It was reported that Imagry would sleep with a lot of older men growing up in exchange for renting cars. William Bill Nelson, a 56-year-old pilot, would eventually meet with Imagry in a bar. They seemed to fall in love pretty quickly, as they were married within a month, but things went left very quickly between the two shortly after. On Thanksgiving Day, Imagry would take the husband out with the clothes iron and scissors. She would then chop and use his remains with leftover Thanksgiving turkey. She was arrested after, and allegedly offered a friend money to help her dispose of it. She was convicted and sentenced to 28 years to life. This happened a few years ago around Thanksgiving. I used to work at the butcher and deli section of a supermarket. The job itself was great. I like carving up the carcasses and interacting with the customers to prepare stuff made to order. The general environment of the kitchen had a pretty good vibe. I spent most of my time prepping various cuts of meat, like deboning chicken and cutting steaks. Otherwise, I was cleaning and chatting with my coworkers. The majority of the people I worked with were pretty cool, except for the one guy I spent the most time with. This fat slob named Sean. He was the head of the butcher department, so I trained and worked under him. I was forced to get to know him quite well. He was a real creep though, always pushing the boundaries of what would get him in trouble with the female employees. The guy must have thought I was buddies with him or something, because he was comfortable enough to go overboard with the harassing jokes with me.
Hey Mike, was that your mom that just came in and bought a turkey? Yeah, why? 'Cause she's smoking hot. You never told me your mom was such a MILF. You know the turkeys here got enough room for my stuffing.
He was more immature than myself despite the age difference. One of his favorite things to do was to tell me to go somewhere in the kitchen and grab something, only to watch me fall from the wet floor. He would then come over with a wet floor sign and make a joke out of my expense. I knew the piece of shit was doing it intentionally, literally risking a lawsuit just for a laugh. Despite the humiliation and bruises, I put up with Sean's crap. I didn't want to get on his bad side and make things even worse for myself. That, and I was growing genuinely interested in the idea of working in a butcher or a deli as a long-term career. Maybe even opening my own shop one day. so I needed to get good experience. That said, I always hoped he would call out of work or find something to do that wasn't around me. Then, last year, in the days leading up to Thanksgiving, we got a huge influx of business in the whole store, concentrated on us in the butcher department. Everybody wanted to get their hands on a turkey or a ham. People were coming in at the last minute. For the most part, Sean put his nose to the grindstone and kept up with things. However, something else about his routine also changed. During the 3 days before Thanksgiving, one of our tasks was to prepare the pre-stuffed and pre-brined turkeys. That was the only time of year we did that, just to make it easier for people cooking large Thanksgiving feasts. For that reason, I had never been trained to do it, so it was something I wanted to try for the first time. Unfortunately, Sean wouldn't let me near the process. Something about the whole thing just seemed sketchy as hell, but I couldn't really do much about it. For about an hour each day, he sealed himself off in his own corner of the kitchen and wouldn't let anyone disturb him. And when I got involved, the guy would snap.
Get the hell away from me before I stuff you with my fist!
When I asked why I couldn't be a part of it, he said it was more of a culinary process than a butchering process, so I would probably screw it up. I brushed it off and kept busy. Then at 5 o'clock, my shift ended. I took home one of Sean's pre-prepared turkeys, as the manager of the store let anyone who worked on Thanksgiving Day take home a bird at a heavy discount. But since I was in the butcher department, I got it for free. It was a nice perk to take home to my family. They waited to start cooking until I got home, so we didn't sit down to eat until about 8 or 9 o'clock. I was very much looking forward to the feast after a long day at work, but as everyone was loading up their plates, my phone rang. It said it was an unknown number, so out of curiosity, I answered it. On the other end, I heard a weird, muffled voice that sounded vaguely familiar.
Hey, are you eating turkey for Thanksgiving? Yeah. Who is this? Is it stuffed? Who is this? Is this some kind of prank? I just thought you should know that the stuffing is full of deadly poison. Wait, what? What the? Hey, guys, don't eat the turkey. I think it's poisoned.
After I warned my family, I immediately called my boss and told him the pre-stuffed turkeys might be poisoned. He snapped at me, blaming me for the situation and yelling about how I was going to get him sued. But I didn't care if he fired me. I just wanted to save people from getting poisoned. As it turns out, the turkeys actually were poisoned. There were several complaints lobbed at the store about people getting sick after eating them, but luckily, nobody died. However, the store did get sued. By then, I was long gone and working somewhere else. It was never proven, but I know without a shadow of a doubt that Sean was the one poisoning the turkeys. There's no other reason for his secrecy regarding the process of preparing them. I just can't believe I worked so closely with such a sick freak. This story was inspired by a bizarre Thanksgiving incident regarding an anonymous caller who claimed he had injected packages of Lilydale turkey parts with poison. This of course caused the franchise to go into a panic. After examining 1,600 packages of turkey parts at a Victoria grocery chain, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency says it's found no evidence of deliberate poisoning. Despite finding nothing, all the turkeys were destroyed. The company has since raised its quality inspection standards, even though there were no signs of poisoning to mitigate risks of it even happening, since the whole ordeal got media and public awareness.